Child development is grounded in a feeling of safety. If the nest does not feel safe, then the child's development becomes inhibited in some way. That any time that we're in a fight that's win-lose and it's a partnership, if one person has that attitude on, everybody loses. Welcome to another episode of Rich in Relationship. And today we're going to talk about innocent bystanders, children's silent journey in marital discord. Let's be really clear. What this episode is going to be all about is children and how marital discord impacts them. And we're going to talk about children at different ages. Right? What are the sensitivities and potential impacts on your children when there's conflict? Forget marital discord. When there's not just conflict, when there's negative conflict. And first, let's just define what are we talking about. When we're talking about negative or toxic conflict, it's that fight that you've been having for a long time. You know, the one that goes nowhere, right? We all know that fight. It's the one where you feel like you got to win. And maybe part of that is they got to lose. And at the same time, they have the same thing going on. They got to win and you got to lose. And so you know that any time that we're in a fight that's win-lose and it's a partnership, if one person has that attitude on, everybody loses, right? Because in a partnership, when one person loses, both people lose. Partnerships, by definition, are win-win. Right? So the second that we have to win at the expense of our partner, it's like cannibalism, right? We're eating our own flesh. Because a partnership is two hearts as one. A partnership is two people working together for the same future, for the same dream. That's what we're defining as toxic or marital discord. So the basic age groups we're going to talk about here are 0 to 7, 8 to 12, and 12 to 18. Though we could talk also about 18 and after a little bit, which I think I'm going to do. And the reason why we have them broken down in those groups is 0 to 7 is when the unconscious mind is formed. Well, why do we care about the unconscious mind? Because the unconscious mind is our operating system. The unconscious mind is what causes our heart to beat. The unconscious mind is what keeps us breathing. The unconscious, unless we intervene consciously, right? And we can consciously intervene with those functions. There are yogis who have demonstrated that they have that level of control over their body consciously. But it takes work, right? Really, our unconscious mind's whole purpose is so that our conscious mind doesn't have to do that stuff. And by the same token, our unconscious mind is the operating system with which we navigate social life, social future. And what's inside of social life and social future? Relationships. And what's inside of relationships? Intimate relationships. And what's inside of intimate relationships? Marriage and partnership. And so everything that our children are going to learn in their operating system about these things occur from 0 to 7. And what we demonstrate to them at that age is really important. It's the difference between having an operating system that's fluid and that can learn, or one that's static and frozen. And so when we introduce marital discord, toxic, dynamic fighting, destructive fighting into the lives of our children at 0 to 7, we impact and make that operating system more static because they feel they need to defend themselves in an unsafe environment. And we're going to talk about what the repercussions are at 8 to 12, which is where they're starting to have a sense of themselves socially, and 13 and on, which is where they're starting to practice those things. Okay, so we started to talk about 0 to 7, even though I was just giving you the outline. And basically, at 0 to 7, if we're going to talk about stages of development, there's this guy named Erickson who has something called stage theory, right? And he says the big thing that 0 to 7 kids in the age of the 0 to 7 age range, that's what I'm trying to get out of my mouth here, are wrestling with is trust versus distrust, and autonomy versus shame and doubt. And so what happens is when we're living in the world of trust and autonomy, right, we've got that fluidity we were talking about. Our unconscious mind is more resilient. That's probably the best word I can put on it. And then the more mistrust, shame, and doubt is going on, the less resilient, more static our unconscious programming becomes, the more defended we become. And our perception of marital discord at that age, it's at 0 to 7, we grow up in a household where there's a lot of marital discord. At first, we actually don't even realize what it is. We're just kind of drinking it all in. But we do sense that it doesn't feel safe. And how do we sense that it doesn't feel safe? Because our parents don't feel safe with each other. And child development is grounded in a feeling of safety. If the nest does not feel safe, then the child's development becomes inhibited in some way. So common reactions at 0 to 7 are going to be confusion and fear and what's called attachment disruptions. In plain English, if a child is not feeling safe in its environment, it's going to become less attached to its parents. And when a child is not successful in feeling attached and safe to its parents, that carries over into all its relationships for years and years and years to come until that breach of attachment is healed and addressed, until those unresolved emotions and the limiting beliefs that come out of it are released. And so if you're having a negative dynamic, we want you to really think about, wow, it's making my home unsafe for my child. And a lot of parents make the mistake of thinking, well, they never hear us. We're doing it behind closed doors. But what I want you to understand about children is that they sense the nature of the relationship. If two people have an open and harmonious relationship, the children feel it. If two people have a somewhat hesitant, but still harmonious relationship, the children feel it. If two people have a very unharmonious relationship and very much on different pages, the children feel it. Even if you're not demonstrating it by fighting in front of them, the discord and the disharmony that's happening behind closed doors comes through emotionally to them. They sense it. And just get that at 0 to 7, they might not speak it much. They're sponges at this age. All right, let's move on to the next age group, middle children, 8 to 12. Now let's go back to Erikson. Erikson talks about the stages of industry versus inferiority. And so in middle childhood, 8 to 12, we're growing in empathy and understanding that our parents have complex emotions. Like we start to get that even though our emotional range might be simple, theirs is very deep and evolved. And when parents are having intense and confusing and complicated disagreements, children at this age will feel guilt, shame, and anger. So it's going to be a growth out of that shame and doubt seed that's planted at 0 to 7. And their repressed reactions are going to be that they're going to hide their emotions. We might start seeing some academic changes at this age, and there might even be physical symptoms. What do we mean by physical symptoms? Let's be really clear that physical symptoms, because our unconscious mind is the operating system for our body, our unconscious mind ensures that our body functions well. And when there are glitches in our unconscious mind, when there's unreleased old feelings like shame or guilt or fear or anger, that can manifest in our body. And doctors will be the first ones to tell you that our mindset, our state of mind has a lot to do with our physical health. And so at this age, we might start to see physical symptoms, maybe an allergy, or maybe difficulties breathing, or maybe some kind of skin irritation is possible. Initial manifestations of emotional states are going to show up as minor physical symptoms that are recurring, and over time, they may become deeper set. All right, the next phase we want to look at is adolescence. And Erickson identified this stage as identity versus role confusion. So in the earlier stage, where children are finding out how they can be productive, how they can become a part of their social groups. And in this stage, they've seen how they can be productive, become a part of. Now they're looking at, all right, what's my identity? Who am I? And so they're drawing on the lessons, the emotional lessons in their unconscious mind, and they're drawing on the skill sets that they explored at the earlier age and developing an identity. And role confusion occurs when there's been some breakdown in the earlier stages or in this stage. And what can happen is there's a struggle for identity amidst the external turmoil. When there's a lot of stuff happening in our families that's unpleasant or difficult to process, we may have trouble identifying who we are. Or we may wear an identity that's not truly who we are. At this stage, a lot of children, a lot of adolescents, if they're having this kind of confusion, they may wear the identity of being a cool kid who drinks, a cool kid who smokes, a cool kid who experiments with drugs, a cool kid who engages in sexual activity at an early age. These are all identities that can be worn. And what they're going to find when they drink or when they use other substances is that this helps them to smooth over some of the repressed emotions that they're having about the conflict in their household, and it helps them to tamp down despair, and it helps them to stay in denial. And it might even, part of that identity might be rebellious. A very rebellious identity tends to come out of a household that has a certain level of turmoil in it. Reactions can be withdrawal, risky behaviors, and identity crisis. All right, so now you know what the reaction can be to discord, disharmony, toxic confrontation, or toxic conflict. Let's talk about the unintended lessons in the emotional aftermath. Children may unintentionally adopt from observing the unresolved marital discord. And what that means is they're going to start wearing the behaviors of their parents. They're going to try wearing the way their mother shows up in these disagreements, and they'll try wearing the way their father shows up. And so if you're feeling like you're a victim of the other parent and you see your child acting like the other parent, don't be surprised. And now there's good news, bad news about this. The good news is that they will choose the emotional garment that they feel is the best fit for them. The bad news is if the conflict goes on, they may choose one that's not ideal for them. The other thing that we need to consider is what happens with repressed or suppressed emotion. And repressed and suppressed emotion can show up a lot of different ways depending on the age of the child. And without going through the 3 ages and stages again, let's just sort of sum it up as repressed emotion can show up as trauma. And there are 3 different ways that trauma can happen. Trauma can happen from an intense event. It can happen from a series of events that may be unrelated but impact the child emotionally the same way. Or trauma can occur from a recurring kind of event, one kind of event that's related. So let's talk about what that means. An intense event might be the death of a parent. An intense event might be divorce. An intense event might be a car accident. It might be a near-death experience. Those are all different. It could be a form of sexual abuse. Could be an intense event. A recurring event that is consistent might be getting yelled at again and again and again, even though without getting yelled at in a way that feels like abuse, that feels belittling, that feels like it's unsafe to the child. If that happens in an environment repeatedly, that can form a kind of trauma, or a series of events. I had a client who almost drowned at a young age in the ocean, and then had another experience in a swimming pool, and yet another experience in a swimming pool, again, all unrelated, but all of those together created a trauma for that child. And so those are the three ways that trauma can form. And trauma locked up emotion. Trauma, our unconscious mind will, if the emotional fallout of the trauma is too intense, our unconscious mind will seal it off for a period of time. It's not that we absolutely can't recall it, but we probably won't recall it unless pushed or unless we explore it. And the unconscious mind won't allow that feeling to come up until we are ready to process it. And so it's like a defense mechanism. And so by being cut off from ourselves, we actually are not whole and complete, and therefore less able to engage in intimate relationships, less able to be as effective in some aspects of our lives as we'd like to be. Another piece of emotional fallout that might come from this kind of childhood might be that we learn behavior patterns from our parents that might work for us as children in that family household, but when we get married and repeat them, are destructive of the relationship and don't work in the relationship. So in other words, we might learn how to defend ourselves or participate in an emotional system in our family, in our childhood, that's unique to that family, but is totally ineffective in other areas in our life, but we don't know how to let go of it because we're locked into it unconsciously. And so I've done a lot of work with people in both of these areas, releasing trauma and releasing these old emotions through mental emotional release, which we've talked about a lot in this show. But the short story on mental emotional release is it's a technique for guiding the unconscious mind to let go of old emotions. It's very effective and happens, you can do it over the course of a day or a couple of days. And so there can be very deep release from old wounds and pains in a relatively quick period of time, as opposed to talk therapy. So talk therapy can also be very effective for healing these kinds of wounds, because when we do have repressed emotion, when we have traumas that our unconscious mind has sealed off, sometimes the only way to rediscover or recover those traumas is through talk therapy. And sometimes we will discover it in talk therapy, but the therapists don't always have the tools for truly releasing it. And so talk therapy might not be the solution. It might be a great uncovering tool. And actually in the MER process, we do a lot of talk therapy on the front end. What else do we need to know? We need to be proactive in parenting our children. The first is, if we are having destructive conflict, even behind closed doors, that needs to stop. A lot of the work that I do with couples is about teaching them how to stop the destructive conflict and giving them tools so that they can engage in what we call creative conflict, which is where you take your different opinions and take what's best about both of them and create something new. That is not compromise. Compromise is where you say, I'll give you this if you give me that. Creative conflict resolution is where you take the best of two things and create something absolutely new. It's kind of like if you're in business, there was this book about 20 years ago called Blue Ocean Strategy. The Cirque du Soleil is a great example of that. The Cirque du Soleil took the best of Broadway theater and the best of the circus, and they got rid of the most expensive parts, which in the circus was the animals, and in theater was the theater itself. And they created a new kind of circus that was really entertaining, had a storyline like theater, used entertainment like the circus, and they were able to charge more money for it and meet a need. It was like, that's a great example of taking the best of two ideas and creating something new. And that's basically what creative conflict resolution is all about. It's how do you create a blue ocean? It's how you create a blue ocean strategy in your relationship. And it's incredibly fulfilling and amazing when you get there. Remember that your children are developing and growing, and their needs develop and grow as they become physically larger and as they develop emotionally. Their needs from 0 to 7 are really for safety and nurturing, care, love. They need to be heard. They need to have their feelings acknowledged and explored. From 8 to 12, it's much more, it's still a loving environment. It's still about belonging and building self-esteem through helping them discover their strengths and building them up in that process. So 0 to 7 is more about safety and security and nurturing. 8 to 12 is more about loving and building up self-esteem through exploration of latent skills, innate skills and talents and abilities. And that adolescent stage is where it's like where they're discovering themselves. And so it's about giving them a sense of what risk is, how to take small risks instead of giant risks, teaching them how to do that, guiding them through it, and teaching them how to explore new things through this ability to break risk down into smaller pieces so that the costs are less, and knowing when to go all in so that the benefits are more. Wrapping this up, I would say, remember what your childhood was like. And very often as parents, what we do is we say, I will not make the mistakes of my parents. And so instead of doing that, which inevitably launches us into making a set of mistakes opposite our parents, look at what did your parents do well? And forgive your parents for the things they didn't do well, because they are broken and living out the generational mistakes of their parents and their parents before them, and so on and so forth, going back to whatever the starting point of mankind is for you. I'm not even going to get into that. Also, let's make a commitment to be clear and compassionate in our communications with one another and with our children, and making sure that our children never feel lost, so that they're never in the middle, that they're never collateral damage, that they're always front and center in our considerations. And I invite you to stay tuned. We're going to be wrapping this up in a couple of episodes, but the next episode is going to be all about, we're going to start addressing this conflict issue. What if you're listening to this podcast and it's just you? How do you single-handedly take the lead in your relationship when your partner's not so sure or is busy with something else? So stay tuned for the next episode. And as always, if you liked this, please subscribe. If you have questions, reach out to me, rich@richinrelationship.com, or if you're seeing this, you can reach out to me through Facebook or LinkedIn or Instagram. And please suggest topics that you'd like to learn more about. And look forward to seeing you at the next episode.